I'm naturally quite bullish on silver, and I think that it's going to we're going to see some incredible runs in the silver price over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. Silver trails gold. Gold is the leader, so I base myself on how and when I expect gold to move. And for me, I believe that the most likely trigger is going to be, and this could happen in advance because markets price things in advance, but for the market to sniff out an end to rate hikes. Obviously, they look at the Fed in particular, the largest economy, the most influential. And so when the market sniffs out an end to rate hikes, that's when I think that we can see gold really start to take off. Silver will very much follow that. And that's, I believe, going to be the trigger for much higher prices in both metals. I think that, you look at the last, say, 5 months or so, when the dollar index peaked at 112, we're currently around 104. It actually bottomed close to 100, 102. It's had this recent counter trend rally from that level, and we've been just recently over 105. I think we could actually see the dollar index go somewhere to 106, 107. The technicals are perhaps useful in terms of an indicator in that case. The 200-day moving average is around 106, a little over that. That might end up being some sort of overhead resistance for the dollar index. And so from there, I would not be surprised to see it peak and start to pull back. So this recent counter trend rally, I think, in the dollar index is what has put some pressure on silver and gold. It's interesting to note that over the last 23 years, there's been a negative correlation between silver and the US dollar of 80%. So that's a really strong correlation. If you want to decide where you think silver is going, you have to determine what your thesis is for the dollar. And in my case, at least, I think that we are in a longer term downward trend for the dollar, a secular bear. It peaked in 1985 at 160, I believe, the dollar index. In 2002 at 120, last year at 112. So these are lower successive peaks. I believe we're in a multi-decade downward trend in the dollar. My first target in the dollar index is somewhere around 95. As I say, we're around 104 right now. And then ultimately, sort of maybe medium term, somewhere around 90, which is where we were pre-COVID in terms of a low in the dollar index. So industrial demand is made up of things like medical applications, electronics, automotive, and one really big one, I'm going to say the actual elephant when it comes to industrial demand for silver is solar power, because it's the single largest factor in silver demand on the industrial side. Represents 12% of the entire annual demand for silver for the entire market. So really, if you've to look and to determine where industrial demand is headed in the silver sector, you have to really watch very closely solar. And solar has just been roaring. It's been tremendous, and I think that a lot of the forecasts for demand for silver from the solar side, in terms of solar panel production, has been underestimated. If you look at just some recent forecasts and not that far out, the International Energy Agency forecast over the next 5 years that electricity from solar is going to triple globally. So, and some of the forecasts that go even farther out. It's obviously the farther out you go, the harder it is to be precise and accurate. But just on that basis, their forecast for 2030, that's 8 years out, would be that global electricity from solar would be up 8.5 times current levels. So even on that basis, you're looking at 8.5 times, say 140 million ounces. My calculation actually was before the recent upgrade in terms of demand. So we're at, in 8 years, almost the entire annual supply of silver, recycling and mining would go just to solar. Just to solar. We haven't talked about any other industrial applications. We haven't talked about investment demand. We haven't talked about jewelry. We haven't talked about silverware. So, and a lot of these applications, there are always new applications being developed. And, silver is the most conductive of all metals. It's the most reflective of all metals. It's no surprise you're seeing it everywhere. If you look at the automotive industry, there are dozens of applications not even in more technologically advanced cars, just cars of the last, say, 10 years or so, say internal combustion engine cars, that there are all kinds of applications that use silver. Every contact you could imagine, your electric windows, your push start button, everything has silver in it because it's conductive and it's reliable. It doesn't corrode easily, and it transmits quickly the energy, and so you find it everywhere. In the near term, my expectations are muted for the silver price. I'll be perfectly honest, and the reason for that is, you look back historically what's happened during recessions, and I have no clear outlook in terms of what will happen with recession. I do expect one. The degree of the recession, I don't know, but I do expect one. And if the Capital Light Research has done some great work in this field, and they look back at recessions, there were about 7 that they tracked going back to 1973. And it was clear they compared gold and silver and how they behaved before, during, and after the recession. And it was clear that before and during, gold did better. After, silver easily outperformed gold. If you look back, and not very far back, at what happened in 2020, when we had this hit from the pandemic, you'll remember that a lot of the stimulus from governments came on the green energy and transportation infrastructure side. Now, silver is crucial in all of that. If you think about infrastructure, electrical installations for solar, that is the biggest actual increase expected by the International Energy Agency in terms of build out from solar over the next several years, as opposed to retail, for example. And so, as I say, we know that governments, if they start to stimulate coming in a recession and coming out of the recession, the accepted programs in that respect tend to be infrastructure, tend to be green transition, green energy types of programs. Don't forget, central banks are hawkish right now, but I like to look at what governments are doing, and you've got a big compensation from and it's perhaps not that obvious, but you've got this big compensation from this hawkishness from the central banks that are on the monetary side, but the fiscal side, which comes from governments. In the U.S. alone, you have a $1.2 trillion of spending from the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a lot of money over the next several years, and that's where I have I'm favorable in terms of the outlook for silver, even in that kind of scenario, because that will be spent. In fact, they might even gear up the spending to help compensate for a slowdown economically.